This is a reading of Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle, read by Momus Najmi. Nicomachean Ethics, Book 4, Chapter 1. Let us speak next about generosity. It seems to be the main condition that concerns money, since the generous person is praised not in situations that pertain to war, nor in those in which a temperate person is, nor again in legal judgments, but in connection with giving and getting money, and more so with the giving. By money we mean all those things of which the worth is measured in monetary terms, and wastefulness and stinginess are excesses and deficiencies in connection with money. We apply stinginess always to those who take money more seriously than one ought, but we carry wastefulness over sometimes, intertwining it with the other things, since we call unrestrained people and those who spend money on dissipation wasteful. Hence such people seem to be of the lowest sort, for they have many vices at the same time, but the world is not being applied to them appropriately. For a wasteful person means someone who has one vice, that of destroying one's property. For a wasteful person is someone who is ruined by his own act, and the destruction of one's property seems to be a kind of self-destruction, since the living of one's life depends on these means. We take wastefulness, then, in that sense. Now with those things that have a use, it is possible to use them either well or badly, and wealth consists of things to be used. And for each kind of thing, the person who has the virtue connected with it uses it best. So the person who will use wealth best is the one who has the virtue that is connected with money, and this is the generous person. But the using of money seems to be spending and giving, while the getting and preserving of it are acquisition rather than use. Hence it is more characteristic of a generous person to give money to whom one ought, than to get it from whom one ought, and not get it from whom one ought not. For it is more characteristic of virtue to act well than to be acted upon well, and to do beautiful things rather than not do shameful ones. And it is not clear that acting well and doing beautiful things go with giving, while being acted upon well or not, doing what is shameful goes with getting. And gratitude goes to one who gives, not to one who does not take, and praise even more so. And not to take is an easier thing than giving, for people let go of what is their own too little, more so than they take what is someone else's. And those who give are called generous, but those who do not take are not praised for generosity, though nonetheless they are praised for justice, while those who take are not praised at all. And generous persons are loved practically the most of those who are recognized for virtue, since they confer benefits, and this consists in giving. Actions in accord with virtue are beautiful, and are for the sake of the beautiful. The generous person, then, will give for the sake of the beautiful, and in the right way, for it goes along with right giving, that it be to whom and as much as and one ought, and as many other qualifications as apply. And it involves doing these things with pleasure or without pain, for what comes from virtue is pleasant or painless. Least of all things is it painful. But one who gives to whom one ought not, or not for the sake of the beautiful but for some other reason, would not be called generous but some other name, nor would one who gives with pain be called generous, since such a person would choose the money rather than the beautiful action, and this is not what characterizes a generous person. Nor will a generous person take money from anywhere one ought not. For getting it in such a way does not belong to someone who does not place a high value on money. And such a person would not even be apt to ask for things, since it is not characteristic of someone who does good for others to have a ready hand for taking benefits from them. Such a person will take money from where one ought, such as out of his own possessions, not as something beautiful, but as a necessary thing in order to have it to give. But he will not be careless of what belongs to him, since he wants to assist some people by means of it. And such a person will not give to any random people in order to be able to give to whom one ought, when and where that would be a beautiful thing. But it is most definitely characteristic of a generous person to go to excess in the giving, so that less is left for himself, for not looking out for oneself is part of being generous. But generosity is meant in relation to one's means, for the generosity is not in the amount of what is given, but in the active condition of the giver, and this depends on one's means. So nothing prevents someone who gives less from being the more generous. If one is giving out of a smaller supply, it means that those who have not acquired but inherited their property are more generous, for they are without experience of need. Also, all people have greater love for the result of their own efforts, as parents and poets do. But it is not easy for a generous person to be rich, who is not apt either to get or preserve money, but is apt to give it away, and values it not for itself, but for the sake of giving it. Hence people complain about fortune, because those most worthy of being so are least often rich. But this does not happen without reason, for it is not possible to have money, just as it is not possible to have other things without taking trouble to have it. But a generous person would certainly not give to whom one ought not, nor when one ought not, nor any other such thing, for this would no longer be to act in accord with generosity, and one who used up money on these things would not have it for things one ought to spend it on. For just as was said, it is the one who spends in accord with one's means and for what one ought who is generous, while it is the one who is excessive who is wasteful. This is why we do not call tyrants wasteful, since it does not seem to be easy to exceed the amount of their property by giving and spending. Now, since generosity is a mean condition concerned with giving and getting money, the generous person will give it and spend it for what one ought, and everything one ought, in small and large matters alike, and do these things with pleasure, and also will take everything one ought from where one ought. For since the virtue is a mean condition concerning both, the person who has it will do both in the way one ought. For a decent sort of taking goes along with the same sort of giving. But taking that is not of that sort is contrary to decent giving. So the kinds that go together come into being together in the same person, while the kinds that are contrary to one another clearly cannot. And if it happens to a generous person to spend money in a way counter to what is right and beautiful, he will be pained by it. but moderately and as one ought, since it belongs to virtue also to be pleased and pained at what one ought and as one ought. Also, a generous person is easy to deal with about money and is capable of being cheated, since such a person does not value money highly and is more bothered about not having spent what one ought than pained about having spent what one ought not. Not accepting the opinion of Simonides. But a wasteful person goes astray in these matters, for such a person is neither pleased nor pained at the things one ought to be, or in the way one ought to be. This will be clearer to those who follow on. It was said by us that wastefulness and stinginess are excesses and deficiencies, and in two things, in giving and getting, since we put spending in with giving. Wastefulness goes to excess in giving and not getting, but falls short in getting, while stinginess falls short in giving and goes to excess in getting, though only in small ways. Now, the kinds of wastefulness are not very often coupled together, since it is not easy to give to everyone while taking from nowhere, for the resources quickly run out for those who give away their private property, and it is just such people who seem to be wasteful. However, such a person might seem in no small way to be better off than a stingy person, for he is easily cured by both age and lack of means, and is able to come to the mean. For such a person has the things that belong to a generous person, since he gives and does not take, though in neither respect in the way one ought or well. So, if he couldn't be habituated in this, or could change in some other manner, he would be generous, since he would give to whom one ought and not take from where one ought not. And this is why such a person does not seem to be base in character, for to go to excess in giving and not getting is a sign neither of a vicious person nor of bad breeding, but of someone foolish. The person who is wasteful in this manner seems to be much better than a stingy person, both for the reasons mentioned and because the former benefits many people, while the latter benefits no one, not even himself. But most wasteful people, as was said, also take from where they ought not, and are in that respect stingy. But they come to be inclined to take on account of wanting to spend, while not being able to do this readily, since they quickly use up what belongs to them. So they are driven to provide for themselves from other sources, at the same time on account of giving no consideration to what is beautiful. They take money carelessly and from everywhere, for they yearn to give, but the how or from where of it makes no difference to them. It is for this very reason that their acts of giving are not generous, for they are not beautiful, nor for the sake of the beautiful, nor given as one ought to give. Sometimes those whom they make rich ought to be poor, while they would give nothing to others who are of moderate character, but much to flatterers or people who provide them some other pleasure. Hence most of them are also dissipated, for by spending readily they are lavish also in dissipations, and on account of having no leaning towards living beautifully, they fall away toward pleasures. So the wasteful person, who has not come under guidance, passes over into dissipated acts. But if such a person happens to have care taken over him, he might arrive at the mean and at what one ought to do. But stinginess is both incurable, for old age and every sort of incapacity seems to make people stingy, and more innate in human beings than wastefulness, for most people are lovers of money more than they are givers of it. Also it extends far, and is of many forms, for many ways of being stingy seem possible. For since it is present in two modes, deficiency in giving and excess of taking, it does not come about as complete in everyone, but is sometimes divided, and some people go to excess in taking, while others fall short in giving. Those who fall into such designations as thrifty, tight-fisted, and miserly all fall short in giving, but do not yearn after the possessions of others, nor wish to take them, in some cases on account of a certain decency and caution about shameful acts. For some people seem, or at least claim, to watch over their money in order that they might not ever be forced to do anything shameful, and among these are the skinflint, and every one of that sort, who are named from an excess of not giving. In other cases, in turn, people give away from the possession of others out of fear that it is not easy to take what belongs to others, and not have others take what is one's own. It contents them neither to take nor to give. But yet other people go to excess in getting, by taking everything from everywhere, such as those who work at jobs not fit for free souls, pimps, and all people of that sort, and loan sharks at high interest on small amounts. All these people take money where one ought not, and at a rate one ought not to take. Profiting from shameful things seem to be common to them, since they all endure reproach for the sake of gain, and a small gain at that. For stingy is not what we call those who take large amounts when one ought not, and that one ought not to take, such as tyrants who plunder cities and rob temples. But instead we call them corrupt, and sacrilegious, and unjust. But certainly a gambler or a pilferer, and also a thief, are counted among the stingy, since they profit from shameful things. Both sorts engage in their activities for the sake of gain and endure reproach, the one sort taking greatest risks for the sake of an income, while the other sort making a profit from their friends to whom they ought to give. So both sorts, wishing to make gains where they ought not, profit from shameful things, and thus all such ways of getting money are stingy. And stinginess is reasonably called opposite to generosity, both because it is a greater evil than wastefulness, and because people go wrong more with it than from the sort of wastefulness described. So let what concerns generosity and its opposite vices have been discussed to this extent. Chapter 2. And the next thing would seem to be to go through what concerns magnificence, since this too seems to be a virtue connected with money, but it does not extend, as generosity does, to all actions involving money, but only concerns lavish expenditures. In these cases, it surpasses generosity in magnitude, for as the name itself indicates, it is expenditure on something great that is conspicuous. But great magnitude is relative, since the expense is not the same for the patron of a warship as for the patron of a civic delegation. So what is fitting is relative to the person, and to that on which and for which the money is spent. But one who spends money in small or moderate outlays in proportion to their worth, such as the one often giving to a wandering beggar, is not called magnificent, but only someone who does so on big things. For a magnificent person is generous, But it does not follow that a generous person is magnificent. The deficiency that pertains to this sort of active condition of the soul is called chintziness, and the excess is vulgarity or gaudiness or anything of that sort that goes to excess not in the amount spent on what one ought to spend on, but in making a great display of oneself with things one ought not to spend on, or in a way in which one ought not. We will speak about these people later. The magnificent person seems like someone with knowledge, for such a person is able to contemplate what is fitting and to spend great amounts in a harmonious way. For just as we said at the start, an active condition is determined by ways of being at work, and by those things with which the activities are involved. Now the expenditures of a magnificent person are great and fitting, and so are his works, for in that way the great amount spent will also be appropriate to the work, and so the work must be worthy of the expense, and the expense must be worthy of the work, or even exceed it. And the magnificent person will spend on such things for the sake of the beautiful, since this is shared in common by the virtues, and also will spend with pleasure and lavishly, since keeping precise accounts is chintzy. And such a person will consider how the work will be most beautiful and most splendid, rather than at how much cost and how to get it for the least. So necessarily the magnificent person is also generous, for the generous person too will spend what one ought, and as one ought, since generosity is concerned with these things. But it is in these qualities that the greatness, as in greatness of scale, of the magnificent person shows itself, and makes a work most suitably grand, from an equal expense. For the excellence of a work is not the same as that of possession, since a possession that is worth the highest price, such as gold, is the most valued, but the work that is valued most is one that is great and beautiful. For the contemplation of such a thing is wondrous, and what is magnificent is wondrous. And the excellence of a work, its magnificence, is in its grandeur. Among things that are spent on, there are some that we call honorable, such as those that concern the gods, offerings devoted to them, temple building, sacrifices, and similarly what concerns any deity, as well as everything related to a common love of honor. For instance, where people believe that one ought to equip a dramatic chorus, or fit out a warship, or even give a civic feast in a splendid way. But in all these things, as was said, one takes into account in relation to the one who performs the action, who it is, and what family and what property belong to him, since it ought to be worthy of these, and suit not only the work but also the person doing it. Hence a poor person could not be magnificent, since there is no property out of which such a person could spend appropriately, and one who tries to do so is foolish, since it is beyond what he can afford, and beyond what he needs to do, while what comes from virtue is done rightly. But magnificence is appropriate to those who have such means, either on their own or from their ancestor or those with whom they are connected, as well as to those who are well born, or well thought of, or anything of that sort, since all these things include greatness and worth. So it is especially a person of this sort who is magnificent, and in such expenditures that magnificence consists, as was said, for they are the greatest and most honored. But there are also those private functions that happen only once, such as a wedding, and anything that may be of that sort, or anything there may be which the whole city or people of high position take seriously, or receptions and send offs for foreign visitors, with gifts bestowed and given in return. For a magnificent person is lavish not on himself, but on things shared in common, and his gifts have some likeness to offerings devoted to the gods. And it is characteristic of a magnificent person to furnish a house in a manner suitable to his wealth, for even this is a kind of adornment, and in connection with this to spend more on those works that are long lasting, for these are the most beautiful, and to spend what is appropriate on each thing, since it is not the same things that befit gods and human, or that are befitting in a temple and in a tomb. And since among expenditures each is great in relation to its kind, and the most magnificent expense in these circumstances is one that is great there, then what is great in a work is different from what is great in expense. For a very beautiful ball or bottle has a magnificence appropriate to a gift for a child, even though the value of it is small and requires no generosity. For this reason, it belongs to the magnificent person to make the result magnificent in whatever kind he makes it, for such a thing is not easily surpassed, and in a condition in accord with the worth of the expenditure. The magnificent person, then, is of this sort, but the person who goes to excess and is vulgar overdoes it by spending more than is needed, as was said. For on small occasions for spending, such a person spends a lot, and makes a big display that is out of tune. For example, by bringing food fit for a wedding to a potluck dinner, or when outfitting a chorus of comic actors, bringing them on stage in the opening scene in royal purple, as people might do at Megara. A vulgar person would do all these kinds of things not for the sake of the beautiful, but to make a show of wealth, and thinking that he will make himself wondrous by these means, and will spend little on things on which one ought to spend a lot, and a lot where one ought to spend little. A chintzy person will come up short in everything, and even when spending the greatest amounts, will spoil the beauty of the result over something small, hesitating over whatever he does and looking for a way to spend the least, complaining about even that, and believing that he is doing more in every case than he needs to. These active conditions of the soul, then, are vices, but they do not bring reproach, since they are not harmful to one's neighbor, nor especially disgraceful. Chapter 3. Greatness of soul, even from its name, seems to be concerned with great things. And let us first take up what sort of great things they are. It makes no difference whether one examines the active condition or the person answering to the active condition. Now, the person who seems to be great-souled is one who considers himself worthy of great things, and is worthy of them. For one who does so, not in accordance with his worth, is foolish, and among those who answer to the description of virtue, there is no one who is foolish or senseless. So the great-souled person is the one described. For someone who is worthy of little and considers himself worthy of that is sensible, but not great-souled, for greatness of soul is present in something great, just as beauty is present in a body of full size. While small people can be elegant and well-proportioned, but not beautiful. But someone who considers himself worthy of great things, but is unworthy, is vain, though not everyone is vain who considers his worth to be greater than it is. but someone is small-souled who considers his worth to be less than it is, whether he is worthy of great or moderate things, or even if being worthy of little, he considers himself worthy of still less. And most small-souled of all would seem to be the one who is worthy of great things. For what would he do if he were not worthy of that much? So while the great-souled person is an extreme by reason of magnitude, he is a mean by reason of doing things the way one ought. For he assesses himself in accord with his worth, while the others exceed or fall short of theirs. Now, if one who is great-souled considers himself worthy of great things, and is worthy of them, and is especially one who considers himself worthy of the great things, there would be one thing that these involve most. But worth is spoken of in relation to external goods, and we would set down as greatest of these the one that we assign to the gods, and at which people of high standing aim most of all, and which is the prize given for the most beautiful deeds. And of this kind is honor, for this is the greatest of external goods. So the great-souled person is concerned with honors and acts of dishonor in the way one ought to be. But even without an argument, it appears that great-souled people are concerned with honors, for it is honor most of all of which they consider themselves worthy, and honor that is in accord with their worth. But the small-souled person falls short in relation both to himself and to the honor claimed by the great-souled person, while the vain person is excessive in relation to himself, though not in relation to the great-souled man. And the one who is great-souled, if in fact he is worthy of the greatest honors, must be the best human being, for the one who is better is always worthy of more, and the one who is best is worthy of what is greatest. Therefore, it is necessary for one who is great-souled in the true sense to be good. And what is great in each virtue would seem to belong to someone who is great-souled. And it would by no means be fitting for someone great-souled to run away with wildly swinging arms or to be unjust. Why would someone to whom nothing is great do anything shameful? And for one who examines the virtues each by each, it would obviously be completely ridiculous for someone who is great-souled not to be good. Nor would he be worthy of honor if he were base, since honor is the prize for virtue, and is allotted to those who are good. Greatness of soul, then, seems to be a certain kind of adornment of the virtues, since it makes them greater, and does not come about without them. For this reason it is difficult to be great-souled in truth, for it is not possible without the beauty that belongs to goodness. Someone who is great-souled, then, is especially concerned with honors and acts of dishonor. Such a person will be moderately pleased at honors that are great and come from serious people, taking them as hitting the mark of what is due, or even less than is due, since there could be no honor worthy of complete virtue, though he will accept them nonetheless, since they have nothing greater to offer him. But he will have utter disdain for honor that comes from random people, or is for minor matters, since it is not these of which he is worthy, and he will have a similar attitude towards acts of dishonor, since they will not justly apply to him. And while, as was said, someone who is great-souled is especially concerned with honors, he will surely also hold himself moderately toward wealth and power and every sort of good fortune and bad fortune, however it may come about, and will be neither overjoyed when in good fortune, nor overly distressed when in bad fortune. For he is not even that way about honor, though he takes it to be the greatest thing. For power and wealth are chosen on account of honor. At any rate, those who have them want to be honored for them. And to that person for whom even honor is a small thing, the other things are small as well. That is why great souled people seem to be arrogant. But the things that come from good fortune also seem to contribute toward greatness of soul. For those who are well born consider themselves worthy of honor, and so do those who are powerful or rich, since they are in a superior position, and everything that is superior in respect to something good is held in high honor. That is why things of this sort make people more great-souled, since they are honored by some people. But in accordance with truth, only someone good is honorable, and someone to whom both belong is considered more worthy of honor. But those who, without virtue, have the sort of good things that come from fortune consider themselves worthy of great things unjustly, and are not rightly called great-souled, since there is no worth of greatness of soul without complete virtue. But those who have goods of that sort also become arrogant and insolent. For without virtue it is not easy to carry off one's good fortune harmoniously. But not being able to carry it off and believing that they are superior to others, they look down on them, even while they themselves act in whatever way they happen to. For they mimic the great-souled person without being similar to him, and do this in the ways they can. So while they do not do the things that come from virtue, they look down on other people. For the great-souled person looks down on others justly, since he holds his opinion truly, but most people are disdainful at random. A great-souled person, because he holds few things in high honor, is not someone who takes small risks, or is passionately devoted to taking risks, but he is someone who takes great risks, and when he does take a risk, he is without regard for his life, on the ground that it is not on just any terms that life is worth living. And he is the sort of person who does favors but is ashamed to have them done for him, since the former belongs to one who is superior, but the latter to one who has someone superior to him. And he is apt to do a favor of greater worth in return, since in that way the one who did the first favor will be left owing something to him, and will be the one who gained a benefit. And great-souled people seem to remember favors they have done, but not those which were done for them, since the one the favor is done for is lesser than the one who does it, and he wants to have the upper position. And they hear about the former with pleasure, but are displeased by hearing about the latter. And that is why Thetis does not tell Zeus about the favors she did for him, nor did the Spartans tell the Athenians, but spoke of the favors done them. And it is characteristic of a great-souled person to ask for help from no one, or only reluctantly, but to assist others eagerly, and to be high-handed toward those of high station or good fortune, but moderate toward those of a middle station, since it is difficult and dignified to be superior to the former, but easy with the latter, and to stand no one's dignity with the former is not bad manners. But among lowly people it is bad form, as it would be to act tough toward the weak. It is also characteristic of such a person not to go after things held in popular esteem, nor those in which other people are preeminent, and to be a slow starter and full of delay, except where there is great honor or a great deed, and to be inclined to do few things, but great and notable ones. And he is necessarily open and hating and open and loving, for concealing such things belong to one who is fearful. So does having less concern for truth than for people's opinion, and speaks and acts openly, for he is free spoken on account of being contemptuous of others' opinions, and truthful, except for those occasions where he is not, because he is being ironic toward ordinary people, and is not capable of leading his life to suit anyone else other than a friend, since that is fit for a slave. Which is why all flatterers are servile, and lowly people are flatterers. Nor is a great souled person much given to wonder, since nothing is great to him. Nor is he apt to bear grudges, for it is not characteristic of one who is great souled to remember things against anyone, not of any sort, and especially not wrongs, but rather to overlook them. Nor is he a gossip, for he will not talk either about himself or about anyone else, since he is not concerned to be praised himself or for others to be blamed. So again, he is not apt to give praise, and by the same token he does not bother to speak ill even of his enemies, except to insult them. He least of all is apt to complain about necessities or small matters, since to be that way would imply that he took them seriously. He is a sort of person who possesses beautiful and useless things, rather than things that are productive and beneficial, since that is more suited to one who is self-sufficient. And a great souled person seems to have a slow way of moving, a deep voice, and a great way of speaking, since a person who takes few things seriously is not anxious. And one who thinks nothing is great is not intense, but shrillness and haste are a result of these qualities. Such is a great souled person, while the one who comes up short is small souled, and the one who goes to excess is vain. Now even these do not seem to be people with vices, since they do not do harm, but people who are in error. For the small-souled person, while being worthy of good things, deprives himself of the things he deserves, and seems to have something bad about him from his not considering himself worthy of what is good, or to be ignorant of himself, since he would have reached out for the things he was worthy of if they were good. Such people, though, are not thought to be fools, but too hesitant. But such an opinion seems to make them even worse, for the various sorts of people aim at the things that are in accord with their worth, but these stand aside from beautiful actions and pursuits, as though they were unworthy, and likewise go without external goods. But vain people are foolish and ignorant of themselves, and are that way openly, for they stake a claim to things that are held in honor when they are not worthy of them, and then they are refuted. And they adorn themselves with clothes and fashions and things of that sort, and want it to be obvious that the trappings of good fortune belong to them, and talk about these things as though they were going to be honored on account of them. But smallness of soul is positioned more opposite to greatness of soul than vanity is, since it both occurs more and is worse. So greatness of soul is concerned with great honor, as was said. Chapter 4. But it appears that there is also a virtue concerned with honor, as was mentioned in the first remarks. which would seem to stand toward greatness of soul, pretty much as generosity stands towards magnificence. For they both stand apart from what is great, but give us the disposition one ought to have toward what is moderate or small. And just as there is a mean condition in the getting and giving of money, and also an excess and deficiency, so too in reaching out for honor, there is what is greater and what is less than it ought to be, as well as that which comes from where it ought and in the way it ought. For we blame the one who has a passion for honor, both for going after honor more than one ought, and for aiming at getting it from where one ought not. And we blame the one who lacks the passion for honor for not choosing to gain honor even for beautiful acts. But there are times when we praise the one who has the passion for honor as manly and passionately devoted to the beautiful, and the one who lacks the passion for honor as moderate and sensible, just as we said in the first remarks. For it is clear that, since being passionately devoted to such and such is spoken of in more than one sense, we do not always apply being passionately devoted to honor to the same thing, but use it either in praising what is more than most people have, or in blaming what is more than it ought to be. And since the mean condition is without a name, the extremes seem to dispute as though over deserted territory. But in things in which there is excess and deficiency, there is also a mean, and people do reach out for honor, both more and less than one ought, so that it is also possible to do so as one ought. What is praised, then, is this active condition of the soul, which is the nameless mean concerning honor. In relation to the passion for honor, it appears as a lack of the passion for honor. But in relation to the lack of the passion for honor, it appears as a passion for honor. And in relation to them both, it is in a certain way both. This seems to be so in connection with the other virtues also. But here it is, the extremes that appear to be the opposites, since the mean does not have a name. Chapter 5. Gentleness is a mean condition concerning anger. While the mean is nameless, and the extremes are pretty much so too, we are applying the word gentleness to the mean, though its meaning inclines towards a deficiency, since that has no name. The excess might be called a certain kind of irritability, since the feeling is anger, though the things that cause it to be present are many and varied. Now, someone who is angered at things and at people one ought to be angered at, and also as and when and for as long as one ought to be, is praised, so this would be a gentle person, if in fact gentleness is praised. For a gentle person means someone who is undisturbed and not led by his passions, but who becomes severe in the way and in those circumstances, and for as long a time as reason prescribes. But such a person seems to err more on the side of deficiency, since one who is gentle is not inclined to take revenge, but is more apt to forgive. But the deficiency, whether it is a certain slowness to anger, or whatsoever it may be, is blamed. For those who do not get angry at things one ought to get angry at seem to be foolish, as do those who do not get angry as one ought, or when at whom one ought, when they seem not to perceive it, and not to be pained, since they do not get angry and are not apt to defend themselves. For holding back when one is being foully insulted and overlooking it when it happens to those close to one is slavish. The excess also occurs in all respects, namely getting angry at people one ought not to get angry at, and in circumstances in which one ought not, and more than one ought, and more quickly, and for a longer time. Though surely not all of them are present in the same person. For this would not be able to happen, since a bad thing destroys even itself. And if it were complete in all respects, it would become unbearable. Irritable people, then, get angry quickly at people one ought not to get angry at, or in circumstances in which one ought not, and more than one ought. But they stop being angry quickly, which is the best quality they have. And this follows with them because they do not hold anger in, but insofar as their anger is open on account of its sharpness, they retaliate, then leave off. Hot-headed people are sharp-tempered to excess, and irritable towards everything and everyone, hence the name. Bitter people resist letting go, and are angry for a long time, for they hold on to their rage. But an end comes when one retaliates. For revenge puts an end to anger, introducing a pleasure that replaces the pain. But when this does not happen, such people carry a burden. For since they are not open about it, no one else helps persuade them out of it, and the anger within oneself needs time to soften. People of this sort are the most troublesome to themselves, and to those most dear to them. And we speak of as rash those who treat people severely on grounds upon which one ought not, or more than one ought, or for a longer time, and do not reconcile without revenge or punishment. We place the excess more opposite to gentleness, since it also occurs more. For it is more human to take revenge, and harsh people are worse for living with. And what was said in the earlier remarks is clear also from what is being said. For it is not easy to determine how and with whom, and in what circumstances, and for how much time one ought to be angry, and at what point one does so rightly or go astray. But the person who deviates a little is not blamed, whether the deviation is toward the more or towards the less. For sometimes we praise those who underdo it and call them gentle, while sometimes we call those who are harsh manly, as people capable of ruling. And for deviating how much and in what way one is to be blamed is not easy to give an account of by a formulation. For such things are in the particulars, and the judgment is in the perceiving. But this much is clear at any rate, that the mean active condition is praised, in accord with which we get angry with the people whom one ought to get angry with, on the grounds on which one ought, as one ought, and all such things, while the kinds of excess and deficiency are blamed, to a small extent when they occur slightly, to a greater extent when they occur more, and to a great extent when they occur to a considerable degree. It is clear then that one must hold to the mean active condition. So let the active conditions connected with anger have been discussed. Chapter 6. in social relations, in living with others, and in sharing words and deeds. Some people seem to be obsequious, who compliment everything in order to please, and object to nothing, but believe that they must not be responsible for any pain to those they happen to be around. Those who, from an attitude opposite to that of these people, object to everything and do not consider at all the pain they cause, are called hard to get along with and contrary. So it is not unclear that the active conditions spoken of are blamed, nor that the mean in these things is praised, in accord with which one will be accepting of the things one ought to be accepting of, and as one ought to be. And likewise one will not take a hand in the things one ought not to take a hand in. There has not been any name given to it, but it seems most like friendship. For it is the sort of person who is in accord with this mean active condition that we have in mind in speaking of a kind friend, though that also includes feeling affection. But it is different from friendship because it is without feeling and without affection for one's associates, for without liking or disliking. But just by being this sort of a person, one is accepting of each thing in the way one ought to be. Such a person will do things the same way toward those he knows and those he doesn't, and those he is accustomed to be around and those he isn't, except for doing them in the way that is fitting in each case, since it is not appropriate to be considerate in the same way of both customary associates and strangers, not to do what causes them pain in the same way. In general, then, it was said that such a person will associate with people in the way one ought, and having reference to what is beautiful and what is advantageous, will aim either at not causing them pain or at joining in their pleasure. For such a person seems to be concerned with pleasures and pains that turn up in social relations. In those situations in which it is not a beautiful thing or is a harmful thing for him to join in pleasing others, he will not take a hand in it and will choose to do what gives pain. Also, if joining it would bring disgrace to the one doing so, and that not a small one, or bring harm, while his opposition to it would cause little pain, he will not be receptive to it, but keep his hands off. But he will associate in different ways with people of high position, and those he just happens to be around, and with those who are more and less known to him, and similarly in accord with other differences, allotting what is fitting to each sort, choosing for its own sake to join in giving pleasure, but being cautious about giving pain, and thinking out the likely consequences with respect to what is beautiful or advantageous. I mean, in case these would be too great. And for the sake of great pleasure in the long run, he will give a little pain. The person at the mean, then, is of this sort, and is not named. The sort of person who joins in pleasures from an aim of being pleasant, and for no other reason, is obsequious, while the sort who does so in order to get some benefit for himself in money or what money can buy is a flatterer. And it was said that someone who keeps his hands off all common pleasures is hard to get along with or contrary. And the extremes themselves seem to be the things that stand opposed, since the mean is nameless. Chapter 7. The mean condition related to bragging is concerned with pretty much the same situations, and it itself is also nameless. But it is not a bad idea to go on to such things too, for we might get a better knowledge of the things connected with character by going through them each by each, and we might be more persuaded that virtues are mean conditions by noticing that it is that way in all cases. Now, those who associate with a view toward pleasure and pain in living with others have been discussed. So let us speak about those who are truthful and those who are deceitful in words and deeds alike, and in the way they present themselves. Now, the braggart seems to be someone who takes upon himself a reputation for things that do not belong to him, or exaggerated over those that belong to him, while the ironic person, on the contrary, seems to disown things that do belong to him or understate them. But the person at the mean, being someone who calls each thing by its right name, is apt to be truthful in his life as well as in speech, acknowledging the things that belong to him, and nothing greater or less as his own. And it is possible to do each of these things for the sake of some particular end or for none. But each person says and does things that correspond to the sort of person he is, and lives in that way, when he is not acting for the sake of any particular end. By itself, what is false is base and blamable, and what is true is beautiful and to be praised. So too the truthful person, who is the mean, is praised, while both kinds of deceptive people are blamed, but more so the braggart. Let us speak about both sorts, but first about the truthful sort. Now, we are not talking about someone who is truthful in contractual agreements, nor about the things that are coextensive with injustice and justice, since these pertain to another virtue, but who is truthful in speech and in life on occasions when nothing of that sort is at stake, from being that way by an active condition of the soul. And someone of this sort seems to be a decent person, for one who is passionately devoted to the truth, even in situations in which telling the truth makes no difference, will be truthful still more in situations in which it does make a difference, since he will be on guard against falsehood when it is shameful, when it is something he was on guard against even by itself, and such a person is praised. He will lean more towards something that understates the truth, since this appears to be more in harmony with one for whom exaggerations are hard to bear. The one who takes upon himself more credit than belongs to him, for the sake of no end, while he seems like someone base, or else he would not take delight in a lie, appears to be empty-headed rather than bad. But if it is for the sake of some end, one who does so for the sake of reputation or honor is not blamed too much as a braggart, but someone who does so for money or for things that can be turned into money is more disgraceful. A braggart is not a braggart in his predisposition, but in his choice, for it is from an active condition of the soul, and from being just that sort of person that one is a braggart. In the same way, a liar too is either someone who delights in the lie itself, or someone who is grasping at reputation or gain. So those who brag for the sake of reputation make a pretense of the sort of things for which there is a praise or congratulation, while those who do so for gain pretend to things that give enjoyment to their neighbors, and that can escape discovery that they are not so, pretending, for instance, that they are prophetic or wise or skilled in medicine. Most people make a pretense of and brag about things of that sort, since they have in them the attributes mentioned. Ironic people who speak in understatement appear to be more gracious in their characters, for they do not seem to speak for the sake of gain, but as a way of avoiding pretentiousness. These people especially deny things that are in high repute, as Socrates used to do. But those who deny things that are minor and obvious are called hyper-precious and are easier to look down on, and sometimes it seems to be a means of bragging, like Spartan clothes. For not only the excess but also too great a deficiency are boastful, but those who use irony in a measured way in connection with things that are not too commonplace and obvious show themselves to be gracious by being ironic. And it is the braggart who seems opposite to the truthful person, since he is worse. Chapter 8. But since in life there is also relaxation, and in this there is a playful way of passing the time, here too there seems to be a harmonious way of associating with people, sorts of things that one ought to say, and a way of saying them, and likewise a way of taking what is said. And the sort of people among whom one is speaking or to whom one is listening will also make a difference. And it is clear that in connection with these things too, there is an excess and a deficiency with respect to a mean. Now those who go to excess in making people laugh seem to be crude buffoons, greedily eager to do anything for a laugh, and aiming at causing laughter rather than at speaking gracefully without causing pain to the one who is made fun of. But those who do not say anything funny themselves and are disdainful toward people who do seem to be boorish and rigid. Those who are playful in a harmonious way are called charming, as being readily flexible, for such acts seem to be the motions that come from one's character, and just as bodies are judged by their ways of moving, so too are people's characters. But since something to laugh at is always at hand, and most people delight in playfulness and mockery more than one ought, buffoonish people are also called charming, as if they were delightful. But that charming people are different, and in no small way, is clear from what has been said. And a property that belongs to the mean active condition is adroitness, and it is characteristic of one who is adroit to say and listen to things of a sort that are fitting for someone decent and of a generous spirit. For there is something that is appropriate for such a person to say by way of playfulness, and also to listen to, and the playfulness that belongs to a generous spirit differs from that of a slavish spirit. So does that of an educated person from that of someone uneducated. One may see this also in old-fashioned and modern comedies, since foul language was a source of laughter in the former, but subtlety instead in the latter, and these differ no small amount with respect to gracefulness. Might one then define the person good at joking as saying what is not inappropriate to a generous spirit, or as not causing pain to one who hears it, or even causing merriment in the one made fun of? Or is this sort of thing not even definable? For different things are hateful and pleasant to different people. So, also are the things someone will listen to. For what one puts up with hearing, it seems one also does. Now, one will not do just anything, for a joke is a certain kind of slander, and the lawmakers prohibit some things from being said in slander, or perhaps they also ought to have prohibited some things from being said in jest. But someone with a gracious and generous spirit will hold himself to such limits, being like a law to himself. Of this sort, then, is the person at the mean, whether he is called adroit or charming. But the buffoon is too weak to resist a joke, sparing neither himself nor anyone else if he is going to cause a laugh, and saying things of a sort that a gracious person would by no means say, and some that he would not even listen to. But the boorish person is useless in this sort of social life, for while contributing nothing, he is disdainful toward everything. But the relaxation and playfulness in life seem to be necessary. So there are three mean conditions in life that have been spoken of, and all are concerned with sharing in certain words and actions. They differ in that one is concerned with truth, and the others with pleasure. And of those concerned with pleasure, one is present in playful situations, and the other in social occasions throughout the rest of life. Chapter 9. It is not appropriate to speak about a sense of shame as if it were a virtue, for it seems more like a feeling than like an active condition. It is defined at any rate as a certain kind of fear of a bad reputation, and it ends up being pretty much the same as a fear concerned with terrifying things. For people who are ashamed blush, while those who are afraid of death turn pale. Both then appear to be bodily in some way, which seems to belong more to a feeling than to an active condition. The feeling is not fitting in every time of life, but only in the young. For we think it necessary for those at that time of life to have a sense of shame, because since they live by feeling, they err in many ways, but are held back by shame. And we praise those among the young who display shame. But no one would praise an older person for being filled with shame, since we think he ought not to do anything to which shame applies. For shame does not belong to decent people, if it comes about for base acts, since one ought not to do such things, and if some things are truly shameful, while others are so according to opinion, it makes no difference, while neither sort ought to be done, and so shame ought not to be felt. And it belongs to someone base to be the sort of person to do any of the things that are shameful, and to be such as to be ashamed if one does anything of that sort, and for that reason think that one is a decent person, is absurd. Since shame is for willing acts, but a decent person would never willingly do things that are base. A sense of shame would be something decent, only hypothetically, since if one were to do those things, one would be ashamed. But this is not the way it works with virtues. For if shamelessness, or not being ashamed to do shameful things, is base, that doesn't make it any more the case that someone who is ashamed of doing such things is decent. Self-restraint is not a virtue either, but something mixed. But this will be shown about in a later section. But now let us speak about justice. And Book 4.